Yeast is one of the most misunderstood ingredients in baking, but once you understand it, everything else becomes easier. So, what is yeast? Yeast is a living, single-celled fungus. It's everywhere. It's in the air, it's on the wheat grains, it's on the surfaces, it's all around us, and its job is to break things down in a process of fermentation. It eats things, and just like us humans, it emits gas in the form of carbon dioxide as a result. That gas is what makes bread rise. Hieroglyphics and stone relief carvings suggest that ancient Egyptians were using yeast and the process of fermentation to leaven bread. And once Louis Pasteur discovered it was alive, we learned how to grow it, isolate it, and eventually produce the commercial yeast that we use today. All baker's yeast comes from the species Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And if you want to say this yourself, it is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Shall we just stick with the word yeast? Yeah. And even though this yeast is from the same species as brewer's yeast, it is distinct and completely different. These modern yeasts are made in factories or labs to be pure, stable and highly effective for a quick, predictable dough rise. Instant yeast can be mixed directly into the dry ingredients without any pre-soaking. It's also known as easy bake, fast acting or quick rise yeast, and there's even a bread machine yeast which is even quicker. The granules of active dry yeast are coarser and a bit darker than the instant yeasts, and they are dormant. This means it needs waking up before you can use it. All you need to do is add it to some water with a bit of sugar, give it a good stir, and about 10 minutes later it will foam. If it doesn't foam, it's dead, so bin it. More about this in a moment though. This is ideal for slower rises, artisan loaves and overnight doughs. Fresh yeast is soft, crumbly and highly perishable, so it must be refrigerated as it only lasts for about 2 weeks. But it does freeze well and will keep up to a year. It gives excellent flavour and predictable fermentation. Just dissolve it in warm liquid or rub it into the flour. If you buy a block of fresh yeast, it's a good idea to measure it out into the weights that you need and wrap those in cling film before freezing. It saves messing around with the cold yeast. And finally we have wild yeast or natural yeast, and this is the one that is all around us. This is the one that's used in sourdough and sourdough starters, but we'll cover this one properly in future videos. So, how do you tell if your yeast is okay? Like most perishable items, yeast just doesn't suddenly die on its best before date, it slowly fades away. So if you want to test it, all you need to do is put a little bit of yeast in some warm water with a teaspoon of sugar, stir it and leave it for 10 minutes, and if it foams up, it's okay. And as we said, if it's not, bin it and buy fresh. Do this before you start to make your bread though, otherwise you wasted your time. So to show you what I mean, I've set up an experiment with 4 different yeasts. I've mixed 400 ml of water and 400 ml of milk, warmed it up in the microwave and dissolved 4 teaspoons of sugar in it. This has then been split amongst 4 jam jars. I've put a little mark on the side of the jar to show you the starting levels. The yeasts I'm using for this are all the amount that you'd use in a typical 500 gram loaf of bread. So we've got instant yeast, which is in date. We've got instant yeast that is 6 months out of date. A portion of active dry yeast. And a portion of fresh yeast. All given a very good stirring in and on with the stopwatch. And here we go. I'll let the video do the talking for a while. Well, as you saw, the active dry yeast made an early start, the new instant yeast was closely behind, and the fresh yeast was slow to party for the first quarter of an hour, but boy did it catch up later on. The old instant yeast never really joined in, and when you look down on the top of the bubbles, I wouldn't want them in my bread really. So the question you are all asking yourselves is, how much yeast do I need? If you're following somebody else's recipe, then the obvious answer is to just use as much yeast as they tell you to. If you want to have a go at designing your own recipe, bear in mind that fresh yeast contains about 70% of water, so you'll need more of that than you would of the dried yeasts, and active dry yeast needs slightly more weight than the instant yeast because of the dead cells. I put this little chart together for you on the left there. The line in blue, that's your typical 500 grams of flour loaf, so that would use 7 grams of instant yeast, 10.5 grams of dried active yeast, or 20 grams of fresh yeast. So if you want to get all technical, and a recipe tells you to use instant yeast and you haven't got any, but you've got dried active, just multiply the amount by 1.5. And if you've only got fresh yeast, multiply by 3, and so on for the rest of the way down the chart. It helps me. On to a couple of misconceptions and truth about yeast. Yeast dies at 50 degrees Celsius. Fact. Yes, it does not like being hot. If it did, the loaf would fill the whole oven. If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot for the yeast. Sugar is required to activate yeast. Myth. It can help, but it's not necessary. Salt kills yeast instantly. Fact. But only in high concentrations. There's salt in nearly every loaf. More yeast equals faster bread. Myth, and probably a worse flavour. If you've ever eaten a yeasty loaf, you'll know what I mean. Dried yeast is dead. Myth, it's just dormant. Bread can't be made without yeast. Myth, many breads use other leaveners, for example baking soda. Fermentation is faster in a warm room. Fact, but it's not always desirable. So after all this, which yeast am I going to use? Well, instant yeast is good for quick breads, bread machines and everyday loaves like a tin loaf. Use it straight into the flour. Active dry yeast is good for slow fermentation and artisan loaves and no-knead breads. Dissolve it in warm liquid first. Fresh yeast is very good for enriched doughs, bakery-style loaves and long cold ferments. And to use this one, just crumble it into liquid or rub it into the flour. But don't forget, they're all pretty much interchangeable, just vary the weights accordingly. Well, that's yeast in a nutshell, guys. A simple explanation of a very complex subject. Next up, we'll look at the different shapes and types of loaves.